I'm Stephen Pifer. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., where I direct the Brookings Arms Control Initiative. I'm here today to participate in a session organized by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, where they've invited a number of non-governmental participants from the United States, from Russia, and also from European countries to offer some ideas, some thoughts on how OSCE might address some of the security challenges that are facing Europe today, and help them do some forward-looking as they think about where OSCE ought to devote its efforts in the future. I was invited to come and talk about what OSCE might do in the area of conventional arms control and confidence and security building measures in Europe, where there's already a fairly good foundation. If you'll talk about confidence and security building measures, which are things like information exchanges about militaries, advance notice of military exercises, opportunities to observe those exercises. You have the Vienna document, which applies to all OSCE members, and you also have the Open Skies Treaty, which allows countries to overfly other countries and observe military installations and military formations. So that contributes to confidence and security in Europe. And those documents, there are some bumps, but they're working fairly well. The basis for conventional force limitations in Europe has been the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, which was signed back in 1991. And that treaty applies a range of limits on conventional forces among a subset of countries that are participants in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. That treaty has been in a bit of limbo for about 4 years now because Russia in 2008 suspended its participation. And that was Russian frustration that countries were not prepared to move from the CFE treaty onto an adapted CFE treaty. There is that sort of that political problem there, which I think has probably contributed to a degree of uncertainty. So one of the things that people were asking us to talk about was, how do you move forward from the situation? I think there are sort of 3 or 4 questions that it would make sense for OSCE to focus on. One question would be, what is the security problem that you're trying to address? Back in the 1970s, the 1980s, when really the foundations were laid for the CFE treaty and the initial confidence and security building measures, the focus was that you had large NATO military formations, large Warsaw Pact military formations, sort of face-to-face across the inter-German border. Happily, that's gone. But I think when you look at Europe today, the concerns more are really sub-regions of concern. And I'd break those sub-regions down into 2 areas. One would be an area, and I'll give you an example, Poland, the Baltic states, and then the Kaliningrad and Pskov sections of Russia. That's an area where I think there's a degree of uncertainty about neighbors' intentions and such, where greater confidence in security building measures or maybe some limitations might contribute to easing the security concerns. The other category I would talk about would be areas of protracted conflict. So for example, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So there are a number of regions there or sub-regions where OSCE might come up with some new measures that could alleviate tensions, give all the participants a greater sense of security. And now a second question, as you look at these problems, would be, well, should OSCE focus more on confidence and security building measures or on actually limiting conventional forces? And my sense would be is that probably focusing first on confidence and security building measures, because one, and it's a practical consideration, those are generally tend to be easier to do. And certainly the confidence and security building measure documents, the Vienna document, the Open Skies Treaty are working much better now than the CFE treaty. So if you could in fact achieve some progress on confidence and security building measures and greater transparency, that also might have the additional impact of injecting some momentum into a later discussion on limits and in fact take you further in limits. If and when the sides get into limitations, one of the things that they probably ought to think about is, do the sorts of categories of equipment limited by the CFE treaty make sense today? And I'm not talking about doing away with them, but maybe there are other types of categories that you would want to limit. For example, the real focus in the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s was main battle tanks. Everyone was worried about numbers of tanks, and that was the first limitation in the CFE treaty. Well, today in the 21st century, most militaries are getting rid of their main battle tanks. The Russians are downsizing their tank forces. The Dutch army plans to give up armor completely. For the United States, which has allowed 4,000 main battle tanks under the CFE treaty, the current number is less than 100, about 91. And over the next couple of years, the expectation is it'll go down to 0. So maybe tanks aren't as important now as they used to be. And I guess the last question that OSCE needs to think about is, and to some extent, this is a result of the success of Open Skies and the Vienna document and the CFE treaty, is they've pushed conventional forces down so low that I'm not sure the sides really worry much about it. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing that they no longer are worried about large-scale conventional operations. But the difficult thing is it makes it harder then to get political leadership at the highest level to get interested in these issues. And I think one of the challenges for OSCE is that in order to make progress on these questions is how do you get the political leadership that pushes these things and then gives the diplomats sort of the incentive and the power to work out solutions. And right now it's hard to see that sort of political push from the top.